Greetings. I want to begin by saying that today, the 26th of August, is an appropriate day for this sort of video, as it's actually the feast day of the Black Madonna of Częstochowa. Back on June 13th, Vocab Malone aired a live show titled Ice Cube Tweets Black Hebrew Israelite Memes on Twitter, end quote, during which he had a segment on dark imagery in general and the Black Madonna in particular, or Black Madonna depictions. And that segment, that portion, went for slightly over 11 or so minutes. And I thought it was quite good and felt, it was one of the more fair and nuanced presentations on the subject of dark icons and Black Madonna depictions in particular. So in this video, I'd like to reproduce about 10 minutes from that segment, which is to say, almost all of that segment on the Black Madonna. Now, I'll add some images and maybe a caption to help with illustrations, and I'll have a bit to say near the beginning and again at the end, but most of what will appear here will just be Vocab's presentation on the subject as it appeared in that live show from back in June. So we'll pick up at about an hour and 13 minutes into the video. Here we go.
Now, I think it's time to talk about Black Madonnas. I think it's time. I have some notes here that I brought up. A large part of these, okay, I'm gonna tell you, are provided to me by my friend Abu Kammer. He's done some research in this, and actually, he has some family members who have as well. So I'm gonna read to you guys. I'm kind of gonna go through these my notes on this. So this is the research, before the show that we can talk a little bit about this. Okay, let's talk about Black Madonnas. You know what? Let me switch over to my other screen here real quick. We're gonna go back to this. Don't worry. Okay. Let's take a look at this right here. All right. Sorry, no, you can't see Justice. Don't worry, you get to see him later. Darker iconography. Okay. It is a part of Catholic art history. That's a fact. And guess what? Roman Catholics know it. So do Protestants, at least the ones who are the iconoclasts, especially. All right. It's not a surprise. It's not a big secret like the Hebrews like to try to act sometimes. They act as if they're uncovering hidden secrets. No. There's whole books on the cult of the Black Virgin, academic books and also books by feminist authors, as well as those who are more mystical. I've been looking into this. There's numerous perspectives they approach it from. This is not a conspiracy theory to the Hebrews lights. You uncover this. Okay?
I want to jump in here to comment on the point about how some people act as though when they find a dark icon, they are uncovering some long hidden secret. Some out there will insinuate that there has been a conspiracy to hide dark icons and that the truth is now starting to trickle out. The reality, however, is that these things were never hidden. These dark images were never hidden, and those who sincerely argue otherwise honestly are telling us more about how limited their own personal experiences were than they are about the reality which existed beyond their experiences. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not trying to disparage or disrespect anyone, so I'll put it this way. If you grew up in, let's say, some rural part of the country, I can understand if your experiences with Christian art were limited. However, if you grew up in a place like New York City or, the Northeast in general, then there were honestly dark images all around you. And, if you didn't see them, if you never encountered them, that might speak more to what I was saying. It might speak more to the limitations on your own experience, not what actually existed in your environment. But I'll share a few examples. In the 80s, I personally saw processions of a statue of, a replica of Our Lady of Montserrat outside St. Bridget's Church on Avenue B in Lower Manhattan. So, for those who are familiar with Lower Manhattan and the Lower East Side, try to imagine people carrying a statue of the Black Madonna of Montserrat around Tompkins Square Park. Aside from that, on East 13th Street in Manhattan, there was a storefront shrine to the Sicilian Black Madonna of Tindari. It was there for decades, for most of the 20th century, and that block even held a feast every September, right up until the end of the 70s, right up until the end of the 1970s. Aside from that, inside St. Patrick's Cathedral, which, by the way, is the seat of the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of New York, there's a shrine to the Black Madonna of Czestochowa, again, whose feast day is today. And that isn't something from the past. That shrine is there at St. Patrick's Cathedral right now, today. Then, aside from that, there's St. Stanislaus Church, which is on East 7th Street in Manhattan. When you go inside that church, you'll see that the centerpiece above the altar, right at the front of the church, is an icon of the very same Black Madonna of Czestochowa. And I want to reiterate and emphasize that the icon of the Black Madonna is not tucked in some side chapel. Rather, it's at one of the most prominent spots right at the front of the church. You know, it's the entire congregation is facing in that direction. And then, you know, if we go beyond New York, there's the National Shrine of Our Lady of Czestochowa, so a national shrine dedicated to the Polish Black Madonna in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. It's this large shrine dedicated to the Black Madonna has been there for decades, and it's not an insignificant place. You know, on the contrary, when the shrine was first dedicated in 1966, the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, attended the dedication ceremony. And then, if you go on a little 45-minute drive from the shrine of the Black Madonna in Doylestown, you can reach Philadelphia's Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul. Now, I love visiting that church, and my favorite work of art therein is the depiction of La Virgen de Guadalupe, which you see here. And by the way, on an interesting side note, the Mexican depiction of La Virgen de Guadalupe is actually named after a Black Madonna depiction in Extremadura, Spain, which was the subject of some of the sorts of medieval legends of miraculous protection that Vocab will mention later on in this video. Now, before I close this segue and, return to Vocab's presentation, I want to briefly touch on the issue of popes and the Black Madonna, because, there's certain folks on the internet who they'll show an image of a pope before a Black Madonna depiction and declare something along the lines of, look what the pope does in secret, but the reality is that such photos were not taken surreptitiously, they weren't taken by secret cameramen or something like that. Rather, the Pope is almost always at a well-known public shrine. Let's take, for example, the current Pope, Pope Francis, showing honor to the Black Madonna of Aparecida in Brazil. So this was far from some sort of secret or private act. Rather, he did so at one of the largest churches in the world, the Basilica of the National Shrine of Our Lady of Aparecida in Brazil. And I'll play a clip, and as you watch it, note how large the church is and how many people are in attendance. A secret known by thousands of people and transmitted around the globe is not actually a secret. It's just news.
Confidando nella presenza e nella protezione divina e nella materna intercessione di Nostra Signora Aparecida, Regina e Patrona del Brasile. Santo Padre, sia benvenuto in questo santuario che accoglie con affetto e rispetto filiale come successore di Pietro, vescovo di Roma e pastore di tutta la Chiesa.
Ecco, in questo momento il cardinale Damasceno Assis, arcivescovo di Aparecida, dona la riproduzione della Vergine a Papa Francesco, che la tiene in mano e la mostra ai tanti fedeli radunati nel santuario.
That said, let's return to Vocab.
Now, we don't know, unless they specifically say, the intention of any particular image maker. We just don't know. Now, there's Catholic legends that a lot of these Black Madonnas were actually made by Luke. Yeah, Dr. Luke, the one who wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, author of the third gospel, as it's called, that he made a bunch of them. And then in some instances, Peter later transported them. I don't buy into these Catholic legends. There's no historical reason to. But they try to say, the Catholics, that Luke actually made some of them. But in reality, we don't know most of these people, especially when it comes to icons. Icons, especially in the Eastern tradition, are not supposed to be signed because they're not considered paintings. The icons in the Eastern tradition, now I know we're talking about icon statues, there's different things here, right? In the Eastern tradition are actually considered to be written. and they're supposed to be exegeted. You can actually find instances where there will be Catholics or Orthodox guys who will bring up a painting beside them, an icon, and actually preach from it as if it's a text. I've seen this. It's online. That's the way they view this. So we have to realize there's a deeper thing about how to read these going on for the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions, okay? I don't agree with it, but that's a fact, okay? We don't know a lot of times, most of the time, hardly ever, who made these, when they were made for sure, so it ends up with speculation. So with that, what can we say? Number one, some were deliberately painted dark. That is true. Now, there's a variety of reasons. Let's give possible reasons. One possibility, of course, is the most obvious, that the artist guessed that the given subject looked that way. Meaning the artist thought the person they were portraying was dark like that. So the artist would assume the subject, Black Madonna or Christ in this case, were dark-skinned. There is a long and widespread history of Black Madonnas and Black Christ depictions. Boo has a family member, like I said earlier, who's actually done research on the medieval Spanish opinions on the subject. It's kind of fascinating. There are some clergy during that day who thought the darker depictions were more authentic. And some of them even transmitted these legends about some of these images being miraculously protected from touch-ups. I kid you not. And during that medieval period, there are some people in Spain who had thought that the certain darker depictions of Mary were more authentic, basically. Some thought that these darker depictions would be miraculously protected by God or could protect you. And there's an example, I guess, that you can find if you look through the literature that I'm aware of, that a soldier would run into battle versus Muslims holding a Black Madonna image instead of a sword, and then attribute victory to the image being on the battlefield. And then that would be cited as evidence for the authenticity of the image. This is the medieval era we're talking about. What's another reason they might be darker? Sometimes they were originally made black in this way, because in the Middle Ages, there were theologians who supported a allegorical or mystical understanding of song, as in Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. I'm not trying to say psalm. It's hard to get out of my mouth. Songs 1:5, they would say that it mystically refers actually to Mary. And so, for example, talking about Sicily again, there's a Sicilian Black Madonna in Tindari. It literally quotes Songs 1:5 on its base. You can see it. Nigra sum et famosa. Nigra sum et famosa. There's a medieval Iberian practice, that's Spanish and Portuguese, of interpreting Songs 1:5, applying it to the Black Madonna. And so you can find it in Italy and Spain. And I just mentioned one at the shrine there, the Black Madonna in Sicily. And look, if you want to find this stuff, you can run a Google image search on the phrase Madonna Nera, N-E-R-A, space D-I, space T-I-N-D-A-R-I, Tindari. The English equivalent is the Black Madonna of Tindari, or a variation. And you'll get lots of pictures of that famous statue. And you'll see on the base of the statue in Latin, Nigra sum sed formosa. Oh, I mispronounced one of the words earlier, but you get the same idea. That's basically the ancient Latin Vulgate translation of "I am black but beautiful." And so some of the clergy, as I mentioned, especially the Spanish and Portuguese one, thought that these were more authentic, and they would apply Song of Solomon 1:5 to it. It's a very highly allegorical interpretation of the text, obviously, and basically makes this wife of Solomon a cryptic prophecy about the Black Madonna, which would be inaccessible to the average reader, but they saw this black and beautiful reference as literal, basically. And so it actually says black but beautiful if you read the text, but some of them made it different in the way they actually worded it, which is black and beautiful. Now, I've discussed the most obvious way. These are just the facts that we know from speculation, what we can try to gather. And the next one is true. My guess is the second I mention this will become the whole topic that all Hebrews like to talk about. But the fact is it's true. Okay? It's just a fact. The other reason potentially why some of these are darker, I said some, this is more relates to the icons, is through the process of oxidation, accumulation of soot. Those two things. It is true that some of the older icons really did darken over long periods of time of sharing a space with candles and incense. Because guess what? Smells and bells. The Catholics, and especially the Orthodox, I got all this other stuff going on, and it affects the surface. Now, the candles and incense can have different effects on different colors. And actually, there's a video online that you can watch. I might try to post it later. And when these accretions get removed, it has a more dramatic darkening effect. Sometimes they can tell once it's removed on like a pinkish beige color, which is employed for the depiction of skin. But then it doesn't affect other things the same way. Now, some people are going to say, oh, that doesn't sound right. But it's just the facts. And notice, I gave the other reasons first, and I'm not, this doesn't count for everything. It's just reality, okay? I'm not the first person to have talked about this, okay? We're just talking about this, all right? So here's what we do now. I have a friend who talks about when he moved into this little apartment that he burned a lot of candles and incense over a 5-year period. And it dramatically altered the light beige walls in the house, but had no effect on darker items in the house, like his cupboards. So it only affected something. You know what I'm saying? And also, we have to understand when we see one thing that's affected one way and one thing that's affected another way, we have to ask ourselves all kinds of questions. Have these items been moved over the decades? Was one higher or lower than the other? Because a lot of times the higher portions, for example, would get more darkened. If they were under the same conditions, then the differences in the painting themselves could account for some things. One depiction is darker than the other even before accretions begin, and that's very possible. You have a dark skin, a light skin, and these both have long histories in the history of Christian art, and these are just realities. Now, I gave you some information on the Black Madonna. You have to buy some books. I'll try to remember to drop a link here for a book that's free. It's a 16th century Spanish work by Padre Pedro de Burgos. He's a Catholic abbot from Spain, and he talks about Black Madonna there in Catalonia. And you can look there, and there's some key images there, specifically pages 34 to 35. If you look, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Before I close this video, I want to discuss the book Vocab mentioned at the end, or at least alluded to at the end. And this is the book right here. Libro de la Historia y Milagros Hechos a Invocación de Nuestra Señora de Montserrat by Padre Pedro de Burgos, who was some sort of abbot of a monastery back in the 1500s. Now, I'll share a link to this book in the video description. Before I get to the pages which Vocab referenced, I first want to show something from a few pages earlier, which is the back of page 32. Now, note that in this particular work, each numbered page is treated as two-sided, front and back, or recto and verso, as they say. So on the back of page 32 begins the description of the statue of Our Lady of Montserrat. As seen at the bottom of your screen, the author writes the following regarding this depiction of the Black Madonna. Quote, Su cara es morena y muy bien formada y muy deleitable a la vista, which means her face is dark and very well formed and quite delightful to view. Now, here are the pages which Vocab reference, which is pages 34 and 35. Starting on the back of page 34, the author says the following regarding the image. Ha sido conservada por Dios sin más renovar ni tocar ninguno en ella. It has been preserved by God without anything in her being, renewed or touched up. Then the author adds the following. Sobre el color de ella contaremos aquí el primer milagro, aunque no sea primero en tiempo. Meaning, regarding her color, we will state here that it's the first miracle, even if it's not the first in terms of time. I take that to mean that it's the primary miracle, though not necessarily the first one chronologically. Then, if we turn to the next page, which is to say the front of page 35, the following legend is recounted. Hizo llamar a un pintor de Severa llamado Maestre Andrés para que la adobase y reparase. A painter from Cervera, which is a place in Spain, was called in, and he was known as Master Andrés, or teacher, Andrés the teacher. And Master Andres or Maestre Andres was called in to fix up and renew the image, to touch up the statue. The author continues with the following. Como empezase por las espaldas de la imagen, luego en ese punto cegó. When he began to do that work, he was blinded on the spot. And then on the following page, which is to say the back of page 35, the author bluntly states the following regarding the reason for this miraculous blinding that befell Master Andres or Maestre Andres. Quote, Dios no permitía por alguno fuese renovada. God does not allow for anything on her to be altered. And thus we see what Vocab had alluded to, these sorts of medieval legends about dark images being miraculously protected, and that in turn, being sort of tacit evidence of their authenticity or God's approval of those images. On that note, I'll close here. I hope others found this subject interesting. And as always, I look forward to the comments of others. God bless.